The Emperor's palace floated high above the planet Zytheria, shining like a jewel in the black sky. Its towers were tall and silver, and the streets below buzzed with creatures from hundreds of worlds. The Emperor, proud and strong, ruled over all with wisdom and power. Yet even he could not control the chaos happening in his own palace nursery. Inside the nursery there were small creatures unlike anything seen before. They were baby dragons, no bigger than a human child, with tiny wings that shimmered in bright colors and scales that reflected the light like polished gems. Their eyes were sharp and curious, glowing faintly in the dim room. Even in their small size, they had claws that could tear through metal sheets and teeth that could snap a spear in half. And worse, they breathed tiny flames whenever they were startled or angry. The Emperor had tried to hire the best caretakers in the galaxy. Alien nannies with multiple arms and advanced technology were brought in. Robots with careful programming were set to watch over the dragons. Even the Emperor's personal guards had volunteered to help, thinking it would be a simple task. But one by one they all ran away. The first nanny, a blue-skinned alien with 4 arms, entered the room confidently. She had read books about dragon behavior and even brought special tools to handle them. At first she thought it would be easy. She smiled and offered a glowing toy to the smallest dragon. But the dragon hissed and leapt high, claws swinging. The toy caught fire and the nanny screamed, throwing it aside. Another dragon roared and sparks flew across the floor. In a blink, the nanny ran out of the room shouting for help, her 4 arms flailing. Next came a robot named X-77. Its metal hands were precise, and its sensors could detect danger before it happened. The Emperor had high hopes for X-77. It walked into the nursery carefully, arms stretched out, moving slowly so as not to scare the dragons. For a few moments it seemed to work. The dragons watched silently, eyes glowing. But when X-77 tried to lift one dragon gently, it sneezed and a small flame shot out, burning a corner of its chest plate. The robot beeped wildly, sparks flying, and clumsily backed out, leaving scorched marks on the floor. Even the Emperor's best guards tried. They thought their strength and courage would be enough. But the dragons had learned to sense fear and react quickly. A single roar sent swords flying from hands, and the guards would dive for cover. By the end of the day, every caretaker was gone, and the nursery was quiet again, except for the soft purring and occasional hiss of the dragons. The Emperor watched all this from a balcony above the nursery. His face was calm, but his eyes held frustration. He had never imagined that his prized dragons could be so difficult to care for. These creatures are meant to be the pride of Zytheria, he said to himself. Yet no one, no matter how skilled, can keep them calm. The Emperor knew he needed someone clever, patient, and brave. Someone who could see what the others could not. He wanted a caretaker who would understand the dragons, not just try to control them. So, he sent word across the galaxy. Whoever could tame his baby dragons would be rewarded with honor, riches, and a place close to the Emperor himself. Rumors spread quickly. Some thought it was impossible. No one can tame the Emperor's dragons, creatures whispered in the market. They are too wild, too clever, and too dangerous. Others saw it as a great challenge. Adventurers and caretakers from distant planets prepared themselves, hoping to succeed where everyone else had failed. Meanwhile, the dragons themselves seemed to notice the attention. Their small eyes sparkled as if they knew the Emperor was planning a test. They played with each other, chasing shadows and flapping wings, sometimes breathing little sparks that scorched a wall or singed a curtain. Each time a new caretaker approached, they would hide or hiss, making the task harder than anyone imagined. But the Emperor did not lose hope. He often visited the nursery, watching quietly as the dragons explored their room. He smiled when one dragon tried to catch a falling feather or when another curled up in a warm corner, eyes half closed in comfort. He knew they were clever, and he believed that one day, someone would come who could meet their intelligence with patience and understanding. As the sun set over the silver towers of the palace, the dragon's small flames flickered across the nursery walls. Sparks glimmered like stars in the dim light. And somewhere deep inside, the Emperor felt a thrill of anticipation. The challenge had only just begun, and he knew that whoever succeeded would not just tame the dragons, they would prove the strength and courage of their species in the Emperor's eyes. The nursery was quiet now, but the air buzzed with potential. The Emperor's baby dragons were waiting. And so was the galaxy, ready to see if anyone could finally discover their secret. News of the Emperor's baby dragons spread quickly across the galaxy. Stories told of their sharp claws, tiny flames, and clever minds. Everyone who heard them thought the dragons were impossible to tame. Many creatures turned away, shaking their heads. But one human heard the call and decided to try. His name was Elias and he came from a small planet called Earth. Unlike the aliens in the palace, Elias was quiet and patient. He did not have 4 arms, sharp claws or advanced weapons, but he had a mind that loved to think and a heart full of courage. Elias arrived at the Emperor's palace on a bright, sparkling morning. The palace was taller and grander than anything he had ever seen. Silver towers gleamed in the sunlight, and strange ships flew above the city. He had been warned about the dragons, but he did not feel fear. He only felt curiosity. "I can learn them," he said to himself, gripping the strap of his small bag. Inside were simple tools, soft toys, a notebook and a small light projector. Nothing fancy, just things he thought might help. When he entered the nursery, the dragons were waiting. They were smaller than he expected but no less fierce. Their scales glimmered, wings twitched, and their eyes shone with intelligence. They hissed at him, tiny sparks flying from their nostrils. One dragon flapped its wings and knocked over a small chair, sending it spinning across the floor. Elias stayed still. He did not raise his voice or try to grab the dragons. He only watched. The dragons were cautious at first. Every movement he made was observed. When he reached into his bag and pulled out a soft glowing toy, one dragon's eyes narrowed. It crept forward slowly, sniffing the air. Another dragon hissed and backed into a corner. Elias noticed this and smiled gently. He did not push them. Instead, he put the toy on the floor and took a step back. The dragons circled the toy, curious but cautious. Elias spent the first few hours simply watching. He wrote notes about the dragons' behavior. Which toy made them curious, which sounds made them calm, and how they reacted to light and movement. He noticed patterns. One dragon loved the soft hum of his voice, another followed the flickering light from the projector. He realized they were not mean or dangerous on purpose. They were simply smart and full of energy. They needed attention, not punishment. By the next day, Elias had a small routine. He greeted the dragons gently and spoke in soft tones. He let them approach him, never reaching out first. He used the projector to create tiny moving lights on the floor, and the dragons began to chase them, laughing in their own way with chirps and squeaks. Slowly they started to follow him when he moved. They even began to accept his hand near their wings without flaring or snapping. The other palace staff watched in disbelief. The robots and alien caretakers who had fled were now hiding behind doors, peeking at this human who dared to face the dragons. "How is he doing it?" one whispered. Another shook their head. "He has no weapons, no armor, no training," they said. Yet Elias remained calm, focused only on learning, not on showing strength. Elias realized that the dragons were clever in another way. They understood rhythm. When he spoke or moved in a steady pattern, they relaxed. When he rushed or became tense, they grew nervous. So he learned to slow his breathing and make soft, rhythmic sounds. He hummed quietly while moving, letting the dragons watch his hands and follow his gestures. Soon, one dragon crept close enough to sniff his sleeve. Another tapped his foot lightly with its claw. It was progress, small but real. By the third day, the dragons were no longer hissing at him immediately. They began to explore around him and even play with the glowing toys he had left on the floor. Elias clapped softly and spoke encouraging words. The dragons chirped and squeaked, and one even rolled over, showing its belly in trust. For the first time, someone felt like a friend to them rather than a threat. The Emperor, watching from his balcony, was amazed. He had never seen anyone connect with the dragons this way. All the previous caretakers had tried to control the dragons or scare them into obedience. Elias did something different. He tried to understand them. That was the trick. By the end of the week, Elias had won the dragons' trust enough to feed them by hand. Sparks flew occasionally, but he stayed calm, and the dragons learned quickly that he was safe. The other palace staff whispered in awe. "A human did what we could not," they said quietly. "A simple human with no weapons, no technology, just patience and courage." Elias smiled to himself as the dragons chirped and played around him. He knew this was only the beginning. There was more to learn about their habits, their likes, and their fears. But he was ready. For the first time, a human had entered the Emperor's nursery not as a servant or visitor, but as a teacher, a friend, and a caretaker. The dragon's eyes sparkled in the soft palace light, and Elias felt a strange warmth in his chest. He had never imagined that patience and observation could be stronger than claws or fire. Yet here he was, taming the untamable. And somewhere in the palace, the Emperor nodded in approval, knowing he had finally found someone worthy of his trust. The human and the dragons had met, and the game had only just begun. Elias knew that understanding them fully would take time, but he was willing to try. The nursery was alive with tiny sparks and quiet laughter. The Emperor's baby dragons were no longer just a challenge, they were a chance to show the galaxy the courage and cleverness of a human. Elias spent the next few days quietly studying the baby dragons. He did not rush. He did not shout. Instead, he watched their every move. The dragons were small, but they were clever and quick. They could sense danger, fear, or excitement almost instantly. Every tiny change in his voice or movement made them react. But Elias was patient. He understood that rushing would only scare them. The dragons were playful but unpredictable. One moment they chased a floating light, the next they hissed at a shadow. Elias began keeping notes in his small notebook. He drew pictures of each dragon and wrote down their favorite toys, sounds, and movements. One dragon loved the soft hum of his voice. Another liked to watch the light from a moving hologram. A third dragon, the smallest one, loved the way his hands moved slowly over the floor. Elias noticed something very important. The dragons were not mean. They did not want to hurt anyone. They were curious, smart, and full of energy. They wanted attention and play, not control or punishment. Other caretakers had tried to force them into obedience, which made them scared and aggressive. Elias realized the secret. To win their trust, he could not try to dominate them. He had to understand them. He began small. He placed soft toys around the room and let the dragons explore. He did not try to grab them or move them. Instead, he sat quietly, letting them approach him. Slowly, the dragons grew curious. One of them sniffed his shoe. Another tapped a toy with its tiny claw. Elias smiled gently and spoke in a soft voice. He did not make sudden movements. He did not try to scare them. Elias discovered that each dragon had its own personality. The largest one, with golden scales, was proud and confident. It liked to be the first to touch a new toy. The smallest one, with silver scales, was shy and cautious. It liked to hide behind corners and watch quietly. The middle one, with green and blue scales, was mischievous. It liked to play tricks and chase shadows. Elias realized that to care for them he had to treat each one differently. By the fourth day the dragons began to respond to him. The golden dragon followed his hand slowly when he moved a toy across the floor. The silver dragon curled up near a corner and watched him quietly. The green-blue dragon chased a light from the hologram, squeaking happily. Elias spoke softly to each of them, humming quietly while he moved. The dragons began to relax, their tiny wings fluttering slowly. Elias noticed another secret. The dragons loved rhythm. When he moved in steady, slow patterns they calmed down. When he spoke in a quiet, rhythmic voice they stopped hissing. When he clapped softly or tapped the floor in gentle beats, they began to mimic him. Even the mischievous dragon paused to watch him carefully. Elias realized that dragons understood patterns and predictability. They trusted what they could follow. He began to experiment. He hummed a soft tune while tapping a pattern on the floor. The dragons followed along, hopping and tapping their claws in time. They chirped and squeaked as if laughing. Elias smiled. This was progress. Slowly he began to touch them gently. One claw at a time he patted their tiny heads. At first the dragons flinched, but he stayed calm. He waited until they relaxed and then he tried again. By the end of the week the dragons were not just curious, they were playful with him. They allowed him to feed them small treats. They followed his hands when he moved slowly. The Emperor's other palace staff could not believe their eyes. The human had done what no alien robot or train guard could do. He had discovered the dragon's secret. They were smart, playful, and needed understanding, not force. Elias spent hours observing them. He noticed subtle signs of emotion. When a dragon's tail twitched rapidly, it meant it was excited or nervous. When its wings drooped slightly, it meant it was tired or calm. Elias learned to read their small movements like a language. He began to anticipate what they wanted before they acted. This allowed him to guide them gently without making them feel trapped or scared. One day the Emperor came to watch. He hid behind a tall column, smiling quietly. He saw Elias moving slowly across the nursery, humming a soft tune. The dragons followed, chirping and leaping playfully. The golden dragon nudged a toy toward him. The silver dragon rolled over slightly, showing trust. Even the mischievous green-blue dragon danced along with the rhythm Elias made. The Emperor realized that Elias was not just taming the dragons, he was communicating with them. He had learned their patterns, their moods, and their desires. The other caretakers had tried to control the dragons with fear or strength. Elias had used patience, observation, and cleverness. He had shown that humans could solve problems in ways no other species could. Elias felt a quiet pride, but he did not boast. He knew there was still more to learn. The dragons were clever, and their trust could not be taken for granted. Every day was a new challenge, a new opportunity to understand them better. But he was ready. He had discovered their secret, and now he could begin the work of truly caring for them. The baby dragons chirped and flapped their wings around him. Sparks danced in the soft light of the nursery. Elias laughed quietly, enjoying the small victories. The Emperor's challenge was still there, but Elias had learned the most important lesson. Dragons were not enemies, they were friends waiting to be understood. And somewhere in the palace, the Emperor knew that this human might succeed where no one else had. Elias had discovered the dragon's secret, and that was only the beginning. Elias had spent days learning the dragon's habits. He had watched their movements, noted their reactions, and discovered that each one was different. But he knew there was more to learn. The dragons were clever and full of energy. They had begun to trust him in small ways, but he wanted them to feel truly safe and happy around him. He wanted to discover the trick that would make them respond completely. One morning, Elias entered the nursery with a small wooden drum. It was simple, round, and light. He had watched the dragons for hours the previous day and noticed something interesting. Whenever he tapped a rhythm on the floor or hummed a steady tune, the dragon's attention stayed on him. Their eyes followed every movement, and their tiny wings twitched in excitement. He realized that rhythm and patterns calmed them and made them curious at the same time. Elias placed the drum on the floor and tapped it gently, making a soft, steady beat. The golden dragon was the first to notice. Its claws tapped lightly along with the rhythm, and its head tilted as if listening carefully. The silver dragon crept out of its hiding spot, drawn by the sound, and the green-blue dragon flapped its wings, squeaking in excitement. Elias smiled. This was the beginning of the trick. He began to move slowly, matching his steps to the drumbeat. He tapped his hands in rhythm and hummed softly along with it. The dragon started to mimic him. The golden dragon tapped its tiny claws in time with the beat. The green-blue dragon bounced gently on its feet, wings flapping. Even the shy silver dragon edged closer, watching Elias carefully but clearly interested in the rhythm. Elias realized that the dragons responded not just to sound, but to movement that followed a pattern. When he moved randomly, they became cautious or scared. But when his steps and sounds were predictable, they relaxed. He began to synchronize his voice, hands, and drum beats with their movements. He clapped softly when they tapped, hummed when they moved, and waited patiently for them to respond. By the third day of this new method, the dragon's behavior changed dramatically. They followed Elias around the nursery, moving in time with him. They were curious, playful, and confident. The golden dragon even nudged a toy toward him as if inviting him to play. The green-blue dragon flapped its wings and squeaked, jumping over a small obstacle in perfect rhythm with Elias' steps. The silver dragon cautiously approached, touching his hand lightly with a claw, trusting him more than ever. Elias noticed another small secret. The dragons loved eye contact. When he looked at them gently while moving in rhythm, they felt safer. When he avoided their gaze, they became uncertain. He began to move slowly, tap gently, hum softly, and make eye contact all at the same time. The dragons responded with chirps, purring sounds, and tiny leaps of joy. They were learning to follow him, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The Emperor, who had been watching quietly from above, could hardly believe his eyes. He saw the human moving gracefully, humming and tapping, while the dragons danced, jumped, and played in perfect coordination. No alien or robot had ever managed this. It was not strength or technology that worked, it was patience, observation, and understanding. The human had discovered something deeper, a connection that transcended species. The breakthrough came when Elias tried feeding them by hand. He placed a small treat on his palm and tapped a slow rhythm on the floor. The dragons circled him, chirping and squeaking, waiting for the right moment. One by one, they took the treats carefully, matching their movements to his rhythm. Sparks flew occasionally, but Elias stayed calm, letting the dragons see that he was not afraid. For the first time, they felt safe enough to accept him completely. Elias also discovered that the dragons loved imitation. When he mimicked their tiny roars and squeaks, they chirped and responded happily. He moved in ways that mirrored their small hops, wing flaps, and tail twitches. This made them feel understood and respected. The dragons began to follow him even without treats or toys, simply because they enjoyed his company. By the end of the week, the nursery had transformed. Where there was once fear, there was trust. Where there was chaos, there was play. The golden dragon followed Elias' hand, the green-blue dragon danced in rhythm, and the silver dragon curled up beside him when he sat quietly. All three dragons now responded instantly to his voice, movement, and even small gestures. Elias had discovered the trick: synchronization, patience, and respect. The Emperor stepped forward and finally spoke aloud. "You have done what no other being in this galaxy could do," he said. "You have earned the trust of my dragons. Not through force, not through fear, but through understanding and courage." Elias bowed humbly. He knew this was only the beginning, but he had accomplished something remarkable. The baby dragons chirped and leaped around him, sparks glimmering in the sunlight that shone through the nursery windows. Elias laughed softly, enjoying the moment. He had unlocked their secret, but he also knew that trust was something to maintain, not a one-time victory. Still, the nursery was peaceful now. The dragons played, explored, and even nuzzled him gently. From that day forward, the dragons no longer scared the palace staff. The Emperor's baby dragons had been tamed not by power, weapons, or technology, but by the cleverness, patience, and courage of a human. Elias had done the impossible, and everyone who saw it knew that humans were capable of great things. The nursery was alive with small chirps, playful leaps, and flickering sparks. And somewhere deep inside, Elias felt a quiet joy. He had not just discovered the trick, he had made friends with creatures thought untamable. The Emperor's challenge had finally been met. By the time Elias had spent several weeks in the nursery, the Emperor's baby dragons had changed completely. Where they had once hissed, spit sparks, and flailed wildly, now they chirped, played, and followed him eagerly. The nursery, which had been a place of fear and chaos, had become alive with joy, laughter, and tiny flickers of flame. Elias moved through the room calmly, humming softly and tapping a slow rhythm on the floor. The golden dragon nudged a toy toward him, the green-blue dragon bounced and flapped its wings in perfect rhythm, and the silver dragon curled near his feet, trusting him completely. Every movement, every sound, every gesture was followed by the dragons, who had learned to read his patterns and intentions. Word of his success spread quickly throughout the palace. Aliens and robots who had fled the nursery now peeked in, amazed at what they saw. The robot sensors whirred in confusion, unable to process how a single human could achieve what they could not. The palace staff whispered among themselves, their voices full of admiration and disbelief. "He did it," one said quietly. "A human actually did it." The Emperor himself descended to the nursery for the first time in weeks. He had been watching from above, and now he wanted to see the results in person. His silver robes glimmered as he entered, and the dragon's eyes turned toward him. But instead of roaring or spitting sparks, they chirped and moved playfully around Elias, following his gentle gestures. The Emperor's eyebrows rose in surprise and approval. "You have accomplished the impossible," the Emperor said, his voice deep and commanding. "Where aliens, robots, and trained guards failed, you have succeeded. You have earned the trust of my dragons, and in doing so, you have shown the wisdom, courage, and cleverness of your species." Elias bowed humbly, his heart beating fast but calmly. He did not boast. He knew this was the result of careful observation, patience, and understanding, not luck. The Emperor gestured toward the dragons. "These creatures are not just beasts," he said. "They are symbols of our empire's strength, intelligence, and resilience. You have proven that humans can match them in cleverness and courage. From this day forward, you shall be the chief dragon caretaker. You will have a place of honor at my side, and your wisdom will guide those who come after you." Elias felt a mix of pride and humility. He had never sought power or recognition. He had only wanted to understand and care for the dragons. But now, he realized that his work had value not only to the dragons but also to the Emperor and the entire palace. His small acts of patience and observation had changed how humans were seen in the Emperor's court. The dragons chirped and leaped happily around him. The golden dragon nuzzled his shoulder, the green-blue dragon twirled in the air, and the silver dragon rolled over, showing its belly in trust. Elias laughed softly, gently patting each one. He felt a bond with them, a connection that went beyond species. They were not just creatures he cared for, they were friends, companions, and teachers in their own way. The palace staff gathered around, still amazed. The robots whirred softly, trying to analyze what they had witnessed. The alien caretakers whispered among themselves, realizing that strength and technology alone were not enough to win the dragon's trust. Only patience, understanding, and empathy could achieve what Elias had done. Humans, they saw now, had qualities that were unique and valuable, capable of solving problems no one else could. Elias spent the next few weeks teaching the palace staff some of the methods he had used. He showed them how to move slowly, how to use rhythm and patterns, and how to read the dragon's small signals. Slowly, the nursery became a place where many creatures could work together to care for the dragons, guided by Elias' calm and clever leadership. The dragons thrived, happier than they had ever been, and the palace staff learned to respect humans in a new way. The Emperor often visited the nursery, watching quietly as Elias and the dragons played and trained together. He could see the intelligence of the human mind in action, the careful observation, the clever tricks, and the gentle courage that had earned the dragons' trust. He knew that humans were not just a simple species from a distant planet, they were capable of extraordinary things, of achieving what no one else could. Elias smiled quietly as he watched the dragons chase a floating light across the room. Sparks flickered from their tiny nostrils, their wings flapped in excitement, and their tiny claws tapped in rhythm with Elias' steps. The nursery had become a place of harmony, a place where dragons and humans could understand each other, play together, and thrive. In the quiet moments, Elias would sit and watch the dragons sleep. Their tiny chests rose and fell with each breath, their scales shimmering softly in the dim light. He knew that he had done more than tame them. He had earned their trust, their friendship, and their loyalty. The dragons, once thought untamable, had accepted him completely. The Emperor spoke quietly to Elias one evening. "You have shown that humans are clever, brave, and wise. You have earned the respect of my court and the hearts of my dragons. From now on, humans will never be underestimated in my empire." Elias nodded, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment and peace. He had not only met the Emperor's challenge, he had changed the way his species was seen. The nursery glowed with the soft light of sparks and scales. The dragons chirped, played, and nestled near Elias. The human had triumphed, not with strength or weapons but with patience, understanding, and cleverness. He had proven that even the smallest gestures of care could overcome fear and chaos. From that day forward, Elias became a legend in the Emperor's court. The story of how a human tamed the Emperor's baby dragons spread across the galaxy. The dragons were no longer feared, they were loved, playful, and loyal companions. And the humans, through one man's courage and wisdom, were recognized as a species capable of greatness. The Emperor's challenge had ended, but its lessons remained. The nursery was alive, the dragons were happy, and Elias had proven that understanding, patience, and cleverness could achieve what no strength or weapon ever could. The galaxy would never forget the day a human discovered the secret of the Emperor's baby dragons.